Hi everyone, my name is Caitlin McMurtry. I am a fertility awareness educator and I am a student in the Journey of Young Women mentor training program. And I attended the most recent Red Tent with the intention of speaking to the group a bit about our hormones and what they do during natural cycles and what they do when we take hormonal methods of birth control. But my connection was awful and I didn't get to say everything that I wanted to say. So I am delighted to make everyone this video to compensate for that inability to connect. So I'm going to give you an overview of how the menstrual cycle normally works, then contrast that with what happens when we take synthetic hormones. Then I'll talk about the benefits of natural estrogen and progesterone and what we lose when we don't have them being made freely in the body. Finally, I will discuss what teens and parents should consider before making a decision about hormonal birth control, and I'll discuss some potential alternative options to hormones, whether the purpose is for birth control or for some other issue like acne or painful periods. So all of this will have kind of a general focus for girls and teens. And I guess I should say, first of all, that my intention is to support people with whatever they need, with whatever their situation and their life requires. But I also firmly believe that informed consent is super important when it comes to taking something like synthetic hormones. And I think that knowing how your cycle works and knowing the benefits of natural cycles before starting a hormonal method is essential. So I am really excited to bring this information to the table and share a bit about our hormones and our natural cycles. So this is a mini presentation, so I won't be going super in depth into any one topic, but if you have comments or questions or want to discuss something in more depth or want me to explain something in more detail, please don't hesitate to ask. I would love to hear from you and continue this discussion. So to start us off, I will describe how the menstrual cycle works. So the cycle has hormones that move in waves to create the events of ovulation and menstruation. And each cycle there are 4 key hormones that all work together in a feedback loop to mature an egg, to release an egg, then ready the body for a possible implantation, a possible pregnancy if the egg is fertilized. So these waves create 3 distinct phases of the cycle. There is an infertile phase, a fertile phase, and another infertile phase. These waves affect us in ways that we can see and feel, like, for example, increased appetite, heightened creativity, sensuality, changes in mood, and also what we call fertility signs. Primary, there are 3, and those are cervical fluid, waking temperature, and cervix changes. So these fertility signs are at the heart of the practice of fertility awareness, which is what I teach. That's a whole other wonderful topic for another time, but I will be touching on it a little bit throughout this talk. So we have these waves of estrogen and progesterone. The ebbing and flowing of those hormones shape a woman's landscape, physically, mentally, emotionally, and contributes greatly to overall well-being and health. So the hormones are moving in these waves every month to create ovulation and menstruation. That's a very, very basic understanding in a nutshell of what our hormones do. But I'd like to give you an idea of how the cycle functions in more detail. And if you want to follow along, there is this cycle graphic that I created, and I've posted it as an accompaniment to this presentation. So feel free to pull that up now. So I'd like you to imagine that the hormones are a symphony. They're an orchestra. They all work in concert with each other to make the cycle happen. And the hormones that make the menstrual cycle happen are made in two different places. They're made in the brain and in the ovaries. So let's start at the very beginning of the cycle, day 1, which is the first day of bright red blood. At this point, all the hormones are very, very quiet. There's not a whole lot of activity going on. But after a few days, the hypothalamus in the brain takes notice of this. The hypothalamus, I like to say, is the conductor of this whole orchestra of hormones. So it raises its conductor's wand and ting-a-ling, sends a message down to the pituitary gland, which is located right behind the nose. The pituitary gland wakes up and says, oh, do I hear some music? And it begins to make its own hormone called follicle-stimulating hormone. Follicle-stimulating hormone travels down to the ovaries and begins to mature a handful of follicles. When these follicles start to mature, they begin to secrete estrogen. Estrogen then travels back up to the brain, to the pituitary gland, and says, we're here, we're awake, we're making estrogen. And the pituitary gland says, great. And it sends down more follicle-stimulating hormone to mature those follicles even more. So when the body begins to, when the ovaries are making estrogen, we start to see some fertility signs. So estrogen starts to make what is called cervical fluid, which is absolutely necessary for sperm survival. So it's essential for pregnancy to occur. Estrogen also makes the cervix soft and high and open and wet. So eventually, one of those follicles in the ovary emerges as the dominant one, and all the other ones just simply deteriorate. They fade away. And the dominant follicle starts pumping out lots of estrogen and starts really, really talking to the pituitary gland. And the pituitary starts releasing a lot more follicle-stimulating hormone. The pituitary gland also starts to release this other hormone called luteinizing hormone. So there's this beautiful feedback loop going on. The orchestra is just really getting going. Now, in order for that egg to actually release from the follicle, estrogen has to reach a threshold, has to get high enough. So when estrogen passes that threshold, the pituitary gland releases a massive dose of luteinizing hormone, which then causes the egg to burst from the follicle. So at this point, the estrogen levels quickly fall back down, and follicle-stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone also fall down quite a ways. So here's this beautiful egg that has been released. Ovulation has occurred. If the egg is not fertilized, it will live 12 to 24 hours. Now, sometimes a second egg is released, but it's always within 4 hours of the first. After that, no more eggs can be released for the whole rest of the cycle. So I want you to get the picture in your mind that ovulation is a big hormonal climax, right? That takes a lot of collaboration and a lot of work to create. So we can't just pop out eggs at random. It's a very specific set of circumstances that have to be present in order for that to occur. So the egg has been released. Now what? So something cool really happens. It's really cool. The follicle that held the egg collapses and becomes a tiny temporary gland, which is called the corpus luteum. the corpus luteum. It means the yellow body, and its job is to secrete progesterone. So again, talking about those fertility signs, progesterone dries up cervical fluid. It makes our temperature nice and high to nurture a fertilized egg if it implants. It closes back up the cervix, closes the cervix, makes it low, and it actively inhibits any more fertility for the entire rest of the cycle. So if the fertilized egg implants, this little gland, the corpus luteum, will stay alive for about 8 weeks until the placenta is big enough to take over progesterone production. However, if the egg does not implant, the corpus luteum can only live 12 to 16 days. At that point in time, it begins to deteriorate. And when it goes, progesterone goes with it. So when there's no hormone present to keep the uterine lining, that rich red blood lining of the uterus, when there's nothing to keep it in place, it all just flows out. So the lining sheds and we have menstruation. And I like to say that the bright red blood is like a show of applause for the beautiful symphony that was our cycle. So you've just learned how the menstrual cycle normally works. We've got waves, we've got an orchestra, and there's all this wonderful activity going on. So in contrast, here's what happens when we take synthetic hormones. These synthetic hormones are called estrogen and progestin. So I want to make that distinction. I don't call them estrogen and progesterone because they are not actually estrogen and progesterone. So I think it's important to note that difference, and we should be changing the language we use so that we don't confuse natural hormones with synthetic hormones. So here's what happens when we take progestin and estrogen, our entire hormonal orchestra is silenced. And all those waves of hormones that we usually experience are flatlined. They just go into hibernation, they go to sleep. So artificial hormones most of the time don't allow us to ovulate. And in fact, the bleeding that we see when we take that week of placebo or sugar pills, or when we take out the ring for a week, or we take off the patch, that's not an actual period. That is what is called withdrawal bleeding. So what happens is the artificial hormones have stimulated the uterine lining enough so that there's a little something there. And then when we go off the hormones for that 1 week, we suddenly don't have any hormone present to keep the uterine lining in place. So we bleed. So that's another really important piece to understand, that bleeding we have while taking hormonal birth control is not a true period. A true period is the result of ovulation having occurred. I think it's fascinating that the makers of the birth control pill implemented the week of placebo pills so that the pill would create a look-alike period to make it seem normal, to make it seem acceptable to the public, this idea of a woman never, to make synthetic hormones look like they were doing something natural with a woman's body. So to sum it up, when we take hormonal birth control, we don't experience ovulation or menstruation. Although I should say that users of the progestin-only pill do ovulate some of the time. They still don't experience fully normal cycles since their hormonal feedback loop is still repressed. So what's the big deal if we don't ovulate or menstruate? Do we really need to release an egg, every month and then deal with a period at the end of it all? If we don't want babies, why should it matter? Well, remember how I used that phrase that natural hormones shape a woman's landscape? Our hormones are a vital piece of our overall health. They do so much more than just make it possible to get pregnant. Our reproductive system relies on hormones to function. And that system is, well, it's one of many systems in the body. So imagine what would happen if we shut off our lymphatic system, for example, or our digestive system. The rest of the body wouldn't really be able to thrive as fully. So the same is true of putting our reproductive health to sleep with artificial hormones. It has a ripple effect on the whole body. And not to mention that when we do want to have a baby years down the road, the artificial hormones may have damaged the hormonal feedback loop, or even had anatomical effects such as atrophying the cervical crypts. The cervical crypts are located well inside the cervix, and they are responsible for making cervical fluid, which is absolutely necessary for conception. So beyond the reproductive system, I want to give you some examples of how our natural hormones have a positive impact on the whole rest of our body. So estrogen regulates blood sugar, it maintains body fat, it regulates libido, it moderates mood, it builds bones, it keeps the thyroid healthy, many other things. And progesterone has a lot of those same effects that estrogen does. It also protects against ovarian cancer, breast cancer, uterine cancer. It helps us store fat for energy, or helps us use fat for energy. It normalizes cholesterol, it improves sleep patterns, impacts our thyroid, libido, mood, etc. That's just a taste of some of the benefits that our natural hormones have. So girls who are just starting their cycles, and teens, and women of all ages really need naturally occurring estrogen and progesterone for reproductive health and for whole body health. Girls and teens especially need to have natural cycles so that their hormonal feedback loop can develop and become more intelligent. So it really takes a lot of time for that hormonal system to get its groove, to really find its rhythm. And if synthetic hormones are introduced, they flatline that whole process. So a girl's hormonal maturity will be stalled until she comes off of the method. Okay, so that's a quick look at the benefits of natural hormones and why we need them for overall health. But it's not just physical effects that we lose out on when we take artificial hormones. There are other things that we lose. For example, a sense of rhythm. We don't get to ride those exciting, dynamic waves that give us so much interesting life experience. Things like sensuality and creativity, letting go, celebrating times where we're extroverted or more introverted, energy, release, grief, glee, etc. The menstrual cycle is it's a rhythm in and of itself. It can be thought of as containing all 4 seasons in one cycle: spring, summer, fall, winter, flowing through each month. So that sense of rhythm is lost. I think the unique experience of being in a female body is lost. It's not something that you can get anywhere else. There are so many, I think, cool things about having a cycle. I'm sure you would all agree. And if only we can choose to speak to girls in a different way about having a cycle in terms of, as the wonderful Laura Werschler puts it, in terms of getting stronger, of building bigger bones, of getting more creative and being able to tap into what you love, and even what you need to release. So that's how we should be talking about cycles and why they are cool and worthwhile. So that experience is not something that you can get anywhere else. We also lose the experience of, we lose the awareness of what's happening in the body. So because synthetic hormones turn off symptoms and sensations that are the body's way of talking to us, you know, whether it's painful periods or clots or acne or other reasons that teens take hormonal birth control, it shuts off all of those signals that the body is giving us to, hey, pay attention, something's happening here. You know, I need to tell you something. And of course, there are more things I can mention that are impacted by artificial hormones, such as mental health, for example, or even being able to sniff out your right partner. So interesting. So, okay, let's see. Next, I want to share some ideas I have for how we can help bring alternatives to hormonal birth control to light, bring those options to light for young people and their families. And like I said, I do encourage people to make the best choices for whatever their life and their situation calls for. But I do think information is too often, it's lacking. Education is completely lacking when it comes to girls or teens and the decision to use or not use hormonal methods. So I think that, well, here are some reasons. Here are some ways that young people and potentially their families as well can make better decisions about synthetic hormones. First of all is knowing the side effects of the method being considered. So whether that's headaches or mood swings or spotting, weight gain, personality changes, disturbed body processes, etc. Knowing that, as well as knowing what's involved with starting and stopping the method. So will it be painful? Is it unpleasant? Is it maybe traumatic? Is it expensive? Things like that. So knowing side effects. Also knowing potential health repercussions. So what we lose when we don't have natural cycles, whether that's bone loss to liver health being impacted, to breast health being diminished. Let's see, what else? Knowing that the method will eliminate the girl or the teen's natural rhythm and diminish potentially a connection to herself and her body. And just knowing how the menstrual cycle works and why. It's hugely important. So those are a few of my ideas. That brings me to discussing alternatives to hormonal birth control. Some teens, of course, want a hormonal method to actually prevent pregnancy, and some teens want, they just want help with things like acne or painful periods, heavy periods, irregular periods, PMS, and there are alternatives out there. So as a quick overview of that, first and foremost, an understanding that it is completely normal and expected that teens have irregular and heavy periods because their hormones are figuring out how to do the dance and how to get in a rhythm. And so their cycles should be irregular at this time. And things like heavy periods can also be expected, although that's not always pleasant. So if it's an issue, there are other ways to lighten the flow besides synthetic hormones. Of course, education is huge. Education can make a world of difference. And what I'm trying to get at with that is that there are other ways to heal issues for things that cause people to use hormonal methods. So if there was more education around how to heal things like polycystic ovarian syndrome, endometriosis, acne, painful periods, that would just cast a much different light on all of this. And I think it needs to be given a lot more weight, because things like that, conditions for which people take hormonal birth control, are symptoms of an underlying deeper issue. So, for example, polycystic ovarian syndrome is an insulin-resistant condition that needs special diet and lifestyle monitoring. And the pill doesn't improve insulin sensitivity, of course. It may actually make it worse. And then painful periods. Like, my gosh, there are so many things that could be at work, whether it's eliminating, maybe she just needs to eliminate processed foods and eat a really good source of omega-3 fatty acids. Maybe she just needs some herbal remedies. Maybe there's something deeper going on. Maybe there is an actual issue like PCO, like endometriosis. So education for how to heal these issues is a really big part of it, I think. It doesn't have to be, taking a hormone. So when it comes to preventing pregnancy, it is really, really tempting to jump for hormonal contraception because it can be so effective and streamlined. And in many cases, it is just simply the easiest, surest route to take. But for some young people, alternatives can work. And of course, the discussion of those alternatives should be much more widespread than it is. So I think that educating youth in cycle literacy and fertility awareness is can be a really big piece of pregnancy prevention, and just being wise to the workings of the body and how conception occurs. I think if all young girls knew about cervical fluid and how to check for that and how it tells you the days that you can and can't get pregnant, in an ideal world, that education would just be standard. And then for some teens and their partners, having really quality education in the fertility awareness method can give them a hormone-free method that is as effective as hormonal methods when used correctly, when you have good education and teacher support. And fertility awareness can even help young people use barrier methods more effectively by knowing their fertile days. So there's a lot there that simple education can provide. And whatever birth control method teens choose, I think that the importance of knowing the fundamentals of how and when pregnancy can occur just can't be understated. And that should be standard education for teens, young people of all genders. So those are just a few of my own ideas for how we can change the tide of information coming to young people and their families about what it means to have a cycle and the benefits of having natural hormones, and what exactly it means when you take synthetic hormones. And that brings me to the end of my talk. I really hope that this material has inspired you and made you curious to know more and explore the topic, or maybe even start up some interaction and conversation with young people in your life about all of these fun hormones that make us have interesting, cool experiences and do so much for us. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what you think about this, and just continuing to go deeper with this discussion, because it is so needed and so worthwhile. So thank you for watching, everyone. I will talk to you soon on the internet. Bye.